Welcome back to Channel 3. I hope you had a great lunch. Our next session is with Champion Spark Plugs. Joe, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. I guess it's early afternoon for y'all. This is Joe Logie with Champion Customer Service. Lots of things to talk about today. Some very heavy changes have taken place at Champion. For those of you who haven't heard, I lost my job as Champion Customer Service Manager a year ago, February. I got riffed when Boeing shut down production of the MAX because I'm an expensive old man. But thankfully, I had stuff in my brain they needed, and they've let me work part-time for them as a contractor. Well, they just informed me last week that that goes away effective April 1st. So I believe this will be my last training seminar that I will ever participate in. Again, very many big changes. Let's jump to this slide for a minute and talk about customer service. So Champion has decided to farm out their Magneto customer service to Quality Aircraft Accessories in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Those of you who knew Wyatt Lowe from the Fort Lauderdale facility, Wyatt Lowe at QAA will be doing the job that I've done for the last many years for Magnetos only. Champion will retain the ignition harness, spark plugs, oil filters, slick start, the electronic O233 electronic ignition, and laser at Champion. So this number that I have up there, the 1909 number, is active landline coming into my house. Both QAA and Champion have talked about porting it to their factory, but I pay the bill on that line. Unless they change that before April 1st, that number will evaporate. What else to tell you? Oh, interesting things at the factory besides this. There's been a lot of changes. Zach Lincolnhall was the manager for about the last 18 months of the Piston Group. He left the company in November. Michael, a guy named Michael, took the job for 3 weeks in November, and he got promoted to a turbine bum. So Zach Flathman, who'd been with the company about 2 years, stepped in, and he was the Piston manager from November into December. He quit the company on December 23rd. That job sat open until late February, early March, and a new person at the company named Dan Massett. Dan Massett, Massett, has taken over as the piston manager. He's been with Champion about 5 months. And another person, everyone else is gone from Champion Customer Service. So Alan Woods, some of you may have met Alan Woods at the trade show. He's a great guy. He's been with Champion about 25 years. He was a Navy pilot, and he owns and flies his own Cherokee 6, but not a mechanic, not an engineer. Let's see, Alan has been the production manager for about 20 years, and he was a quality manager at Champion for several years. So very experienced with internal customers, not so much with the external customers, but we've been working together a little bit, and hopefully he'll be able to pick that up. I apologize. I don't know what to tell you. I will tell you that the slick support at Champ Aero email will still be valid and active. I do know that Wyatt Lowe will be answering some of the emails to that, should it be a Magneto question. And I expect that Alan will be answering it, slick support, at Champ Aero after April 1st for anything other than Magnetos. Again, I wish I could give you more specifics. What other big changes? So Champion has changed their core policy. Very interesting change. They are now no longer going to bill a core when you buy a OE new slick Magneto, but they've increased the core charge to $500 per mag. Should you not return the cores, I believe it's 90 days, it may be 6 months, 90 days to 6 months after your purchase, the core value will evaporate. And again, the core value is now $500 per mag. So pay attention to your cores. Now, they have not released a new core policy yet to the field, and I would assume that they will still accept the 400, 600, 4200, 6200, and 4300, 6300, as well as the Laser 4700, 6700 Magnetos. But again, I can't explain that to you. The warranty process, even though it's now no longer done at Champion, does not change from the high level view that you would be looking at it from as a customer. So you will still return your magnetos through a Champion Slick distributor. And now the distributors have been trained to route them to Quality Aircraft Accessories. Another huge change, pay attention here, this is going to impact you significantly. So for the last 35, 40 years, it's been Slick's policy to not repair a OE new magneto with a defect. That policy has always allowed for it to be repaired or replaced by a credit. And going forward, QAA will not be issuing credits unless the damage or defect is something that's not repairable. They will be repairing your magneto and sending it back. I believe they have a commitment to a 5-day in-house turn time for magnetos, but again, I don't know that for certain. And just a FYI, I will be at QAA in Tulsa the week of the 15th. So if you have a specific warranty that's in process at this time and you have concerns about that, you can contact me or Wyatt or both at slicksupport@champaero.com, and we'll be able to address that for you. I'd also like to point out that Service Bulletin 1-15 Alpha, Champion has had an option for those magnetos to be returned to the factory for replacement of the gear and shipped out at no charge. That won't happen anymore going forward. The magnetos for SB 1-15 Alpha and SB 2-15 Alpha, 2-19 Alpha for impulse coupling rivets will now be sent to QAA. The difference is Champion didn't charge anything to do the repair and the reshipment. QAA, on the other hand, will be charging a labor rate. They won't be charging for the parts. The parts will be warranted that are defect per the service bulletin, but they will be charging a fee. I should also go back out. I'm remiss in pointing out that QAA also has a no-fault found charge. Should you have a magneto that you suspect is defective out of the box, a OE new slick magneto, and you return it and it meets all ATP testing, you will be charged a $100 no-fault found fee to get your magneto back. All right, let me jump back a slide. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to run through many of these topics here, updates to some of the more recent service bulletins and things I would like you to keep an eye open for in the field and to communicate back to Wyatt and or Champion as you move forward past Joe with your findings here of some of these parts. Again, Slick Support at Champaero still will be an active number. So that there, at least you might be able to get a phone number once that becomes active. I would also point out that per the helpline, there's a piston help at champaero.com that you get from the voicemail. That line will also remain active at Champion. I apologize for not wanting to take questions live right now, but I have a tremendous amount of material to cover in this hour. And I will surely be glad to have you send any of your comments, any of your questions that take place today to slicksupport@champaero.com. And if I can get them answered before April 2nd, I promise you I will. All right, so the website hasn't changed. The important thing to point out is that L1363 Revision H released on January 4th. January 4th revision. The most important thing, there were many minor things that were corrected in that, but the most important thing that was done was the stop pin inspection from Service Bulletin 1-19 was included in the 500-hour IRAN inspection. I will talk much more about that in just a couple of minutes. As previously, I would point out that the subscription is $199 annually for the F1100, which includes all of the Slick maintenance manuals and harness and application guides and service letters and service bulletins. If you send an email to Slick Support, if you want to only use the manual on your own personal aircraft and you're not revenue generating, you can still send an email, and I expect that they will still honor sending the manual out at no charge. We ask you, if you make money off the manual, to please go ahead and pay for your subscription and continue generating your revenue in aviation. I would point out there was one error in Rev H. If you use the 500 or the 100-hour, 500-hour checklist, somehow when they released that manual, it jogged out and dropped a couple things out of that. I have made suggested corrections to Alan, and theoretically that will be released as Rev H corrected in the next 30 days. All right, let's go back. Obviously, this is obsolete, but just wanted to remind everyone, if you didn't see me last year, that the 12, in fact, I know you didn't see me last year because UMass, I believe, was canceled. I did my last live show on March 3rd out at San Francisco. But the 12 calendar year TBO overhaul requirement was brought in. I would point out to you guys that fly lower amounts of time per year, that the major concern here is the grease in the bearings. Slick bearings are double sealed, they're super sealed bearings, and you cannot relube them. So the main thing that we're concerned about on this 12 calendar year TBO is that the lower bearing, upper bearing cap, and the oil seal are all replaced at 12 calendar years, no matter the number of hours on the magneto. Another important step in this one, something I've been trying to do for my whole career, was get a 250-hour IRAN requirement for all pressurized slick magnetos. It boils down to the fact that no pressurization system keeps the moisture out of the slick magnetos. The moisture enters the mag through the pressurization tubing. It mixes with a spark residue, and it makes something very close to nitric acid. It gums up the magneto, it corrodes the inside of the magneto, and eventually will cause the metered 25,000 metered exhaust orifice to plug up. Once that happens, it's all downhill from there, as ozone, which the mag makes every time it sparks, will start building up inside the magneto, and ozone attacks nylon. So your rotor gear and your distributor gear will be negatively impacted. So for 250-hour requirement, do the regular 500-hour IRAN for all pressurized slicks. I guess I should also point out at this time, for those of you who pressurize aircraft, that at the end of the 100-hour inspection, many, many years ago, I put a little paragraph at the end that says, if you find any contamination, including moisture contamination, at the inlet pressure nozzle or the exhaust metered orifice or the filter, mag filter, if one exists, that you must open and go into the magneto. And at that point, you're probably going to want to just go ahead and do the whole 250-hour there at the 100-hour requirement, if you find contamination and condensation and corrosion. We'll skip all the other things on this one and move on. I wrote this one this last year. Obviously, LASAR has been dying for a long time. It was our limited authority spark advance regulator electronic ignition, certified in 1996. It came to Champion with a slick acquisition in 2008, but Champion has chose not to resuscitate it. Interestingly, I got a request from the design engineer for slick magnetos. Oh, by the way, Josh Christopher, the design engineer who's handled the slick line, also left Champion in December. And Jason Fireovid is now the design engineer for all slick parts. But LASAR was first certified in 1996. The last new parts were made in 2008. The electronics used to make LASAR do not exist today. If you have a customer who has a LASAR ignition and it breaks for any reason, it's time to rip the LASAR ignition off that engine. The only good thing I can tell you is that as of the last I was told, Champion is still willing to accept LASAR magnetos for cores against the purchase of OE new Champion slick magnetos. No new product for LASAR will ever be available going forward. So even if your customer has a backup part, I would strongly encourage you, if something fails, to have them go ahead and pull it off and change it. The policy for cores could go away at any given moment, and that's now an additional $500 per mag ding against your customer should they not be accepted for the core credit. All right, SB 2-19 Alpha. We updated that to include some TIO engines, not a big change. The most important thing I can tell you about this service bulletin is the 1902 date is going to change. I can't tell you today what that's going to change to, but I've got numerous reports of loose rivets post 1902, and I've made my recommendation to the company to notify the FAA. And by the way, I would request that mechanics that find outside the service bulletin range do their reporting through the defect report to the FAA to make sure everybody has their attention. Anyways, there's been some loose rivets discovered post 1902. So watch this one. This one will probably expand, at least at the tail end of it. And this one still has the potential to become an AD. There's been ADs before for rivets on slick magnetos back in the old 4200, 6200 series. So this could easily evolve to another AD. Again, no looseness is allowed on the rivets. I would strongly encourage you, anytime you have an impulse slick magneto off, that you pop the impulse coupling off the magneto and you do a rivet inspection, both for looseness and for wear or necking down using the T155 rivet gauge. This inspection is a repetitive 400-hour inspection. There's a very good reason for that. We've had failures prior to 500 hours. Please put any magnetos that fall into this category on a 400-hour maintenance schedule. I strongly encourage you to do your regular 500-hour. It would just be a stupid waste of time to pull a magneto off at 400, check the rivets, stick it back on the airplane for 100 hours, to then pull it back off and do the 500-hour, which of course is inspecting the rivets again and many other parts of the magneto. Go ahead and convince your customer the best bang for the buck here is to do the inspection, the IRAN, the 500-hour IRAN, which includes the rivets, every 400 hours. Now, the good news I can tell you, at least as of today, I can't speak for this going forward, but the warranty for all of these impulse couplings has been extended to TBO of the engine. So not the entire magneto. If you're inside the normal slick, 1 year, 500-hour, you can return the entire magneto. But under the new warranty policy, QAA would then replace the defective impulse coupling, test the magneto, and send it back to you. But the outside of that 500 hours or 12 months time in service, you can still get warranty for the impulse coupling. Again, this one had an option to send the magneto direct to Champion at Liberty. Do not do that. Champion is not manned to do these service bulletins going forward. It will be possible, should you want it done by a magneto shop, to send it to Quality Aircraft Accessories, and they will gladly do the warranty exchange on the impulse coupling, but there will be a fee for the labor to remove and replace the impulse coupling and test the magneto. I have no clue what that fee is as of today, but they will definitely be charging a fee. Okay, I think I've covered everything you need to know on that one. Stop pins, SB 1-19. This one, again, as with SB 2-19, thought we had this one done at 1805. We don't. I've seen a few reports of stop pins moving past the allowed limit of serial number 1805, past the allowed limit in the diagram. I would tell you this is what was added to the maintenance manual for Rev H. There are 9 of these figures because there are 9 different configurations of impulse coupling stop pins. We thought we had a good answer for what was causing these to come loose, but now not so much. So again, anything post 1601 through current production, I want you to treat it as falling under this service bulletin. This is a 500-hour repetitive inspection. And yes, you probably have some magnetos out there that fall under SB1-15A, SB2-19A, and SB1-19. If that is in fact the situation you're looking at with your customer's magneto, I would ask you to do this SB1-19 stop pin inspection every 400 hours, as well as doing the IRAN to keep your customers up to date. Again, this stop pin inspection is now a part of the IRAN. There is no repair for this part. As of today, the policy is if you have a stop pin that's either loose or does not meet the height or depth requirement for the stop pin, it would be returned through the normal distributor warranty process. So today, that would go to QAA and they would confirm it. What exists today is that Champion would then issue a credit for a new magneto. And this stop pin portion of the magneto is now warranted to TBO of the engine. So if you're at 2,000 hour TBO and at 1,999 hours, you check that stop pin and it doesn't meet the requirements or it's loose, then you would be issued a credit for a brand new slick magneto. And that would be at the date that you turned it in, not the date that you bought it, 5 or 6 years earlier at a lower price. That's the policy that exists today. Can't promise you that going forward. I also want to point out that this one could become an AD as well. There has been an AD on a very small number of Continental Impulse mags from 1999. Very different situation there. Unison hired a repairman who was not adept at metalworking, and he decided the interference fit was a little too tight, so he bought a reamer or brought in a bigger reamer and made the hole a little bit bigger so they could slide in pretty easy. Problem was they slid out pretty easy, and that's why we bought 3 aircraft engines, thankfully all on the ground when they came apart, and learned our lesson. There was only 99 serial numbers that were manufactured that way, so we were able to can him pretty quickly. But I do know that a loose stop pin can get your attention very quickly. Obviously, all of you know that, say an inch and an eighth long, 3/8 inch diameter hardened steel pin going through your gear train is probably not going to be really good for your engine. So very closely check stop pins, even if they do not fall in the service bulletin serial number range that we have here. Please, again, with service difficulty reports, if you find something outside the serial number range, please help us get better by reporting that on an SDR. SB1-15 Alpha, I can't hardly believe it, but this one's still going 6 years down the road since the update to get these gears converted. So again, I'd point out that Champion is no longer doing these in-house, that it will be QAA. I do know that on this one, they charge a $110 fee, at least they did last week. I saw it in one of their quotes, to bring the mag in, replace the mag with a Monel fingered K3008 gear, and test the mag and send it back out. I can't guarantee their turn time, but my guess is they'll use the same 5-day turn time that they have for their warranty limits to turn their service bulletins. This one should be cracking down pretty hard. I'm just surprised that I've seen 2 or 3 of these pop up this week. Again, this was a very, very unusual thing here. We had done many improvements to the gear by July 10th. Of 2015 when the service bulletin first came out, and we kept the copper finger in there, but based on 2 minor looseness failures in September and October of that year, I was able to push the engineering team to get the Monel finger in there. And many of you know the Monel finger's in the 6-cylinder gear and has been forever, and that the 6-cylinder gears never come loose. So we were able to convince them it was time. The problem we have here is when corporate lawyers get involved. So the Champion corporate lawyers decided that this was the best thing since sliced bread, and that we should recall every copper fingered gear made at the time of Champion ownership, which is September 2008 to September of 2016. So it's a lot of trouble and hassle, but you're getting the part free at least. I apologize for the inconvenience. All right. I want to come back to this one as I had a call on this one yesterday and today, actually. Service letter 1-17, impulse coupling nut torque. With this service letter, Champion allowed me, the FAA allowed me to take the torque back to what it has historically been. Some of you that work with mags all the time know that this changed from 120 to 180 inch-pounds about 13 years ago, 14 years ago, because of problems on the Katana with the IO240B engines. They were cracking the hubs on the drive gears for the IO240B engines, and Continental didn't want to take the blame for it, so they put the finger on Unison. And I can tell you that I personally did torque testing on these products, and I was able to torque them to 1,000 inch-pounds and never cracked one. But Continental won the politics and got that number changed down to 180. With service letter 1-17, I was allowed to bring that back to 320, which gives you a much higher range to line up your castellated nut on the rotor shaft for your cotta pen installation. Now, that said, I want to say that we don't have the final answer for this failure. What happens, this has happened on a very small group of 4-cylinder Lycoming impulse coupled mags. The impulse coupling often is failing on new overhauls or new builds during pre-oiling, even before you have a spark plug in the engine. And what's happening is the pawl is locking up. The shell is not disengaging the pawl from the stop pin. And so it superloads the pawl until the other side of the shell and the pawl comes around. And then it rips the pawl off the hub of the impulse coupling. And usually the second pawl fails, excuse me, at the same time. This is a big deal. We have proven twice that no torque at all definitely can allow the shell of the impulse coupling hub to ride up over the pawl and cause this failure. But I'm going to tell you that I'm 100% positive that some properly torqued impulse coupling castellated nuts can still lead to a lockup of this type. And I don't believe that we have the full answer on this. And so again, if you're doing an installation on an impulse coupling, at a minimum, please ensure a minimum of 120 inch-pounds. What I like to do is start with my torque wrench set to 120 and ratchet around till it clicks. Then if I see that I've got a bit to go, I then adjust my torque wrench to 320 and I slowly advance the castellated nut, hoping to get the line up before I get to 320. As in ancient days, should you not be able to get the castellated nut lined up between the 120 to 320 inch-pounds, the correct procedure per the maintenance manual is to take off the castellated nut, work it on some emery cloth, and try again. Usually about the third time you try that, and you're losing your mind, you can get the castellated nut to line up and get your cotter pin in. But again, I want to emphasize the minimum drive torque. Another important thing that I put in the last Rev H of the manual and in this service letter is oiling of the impulse coupling assemblies with clean engine oil during every assembly. So whether you're working on a mag at 500 hours, whether you're installing a brand new slick mag, or whether you've bought a replacement impulse coupling and you're installing on a magneto to put back on the engine, liberally coat the entire impulse coupling in clean engine oil. Our design engineer, Jason, thinks this is playing a factor into it. Many of you who do a lot of magneto stuff may remember in the olden days that Unison used oil paper for all of the impulse couplings. They don't do that today. And hence the, I guess, added need to ensure that you're properly oiling it prior to putting it into service. Oh, timing drift. I'm going to skip timing drift. The M3081 points released on September 1st of 2015 have proven to be incredibly reliable. I will tell you that I have seen 2 broken point springs or cracked point springs at the rollover hub. The big change that happened at Champion in 2010 was to the point spring itself for cracking there at the rollover hub. we were having a very tiny percentage of point springs breaking or cracking, and we were requested by Lycoming to end that. So they did numerous design improvements to the M3081 points, only the M3081 points. The point spring in the M3637 retard breaker points, primary points, were never changed. But on the M3081, they made the point spring wider. They used an improved steel. They blued it. They reduced the point spring opening pressure requirement caused by the cam. So many, many different changes. And that led to excessive advanced timing drift. This design has proven to be very, very stable. Thanks to the guys up at UND that helped us test these. We ran numerous magnetos to between 900 and 1,500 hours with essentially 0 or 1 magneto needing an E-gap adjustment during that time frame. So these points have proved to be a very good, solid point for Champion. And this is basically where we got too cute in the design improvement. They did too many things. And what they did was, sure enough, they prevented that point spring from breaking. But what they also did in the process was they reduced cam wear. Those of you who are very experienced inside of slick mags know that if you look at a slick magneto that has 1,000 or 1,500 hours on it, it looks like somebody took a big bite out of both sides of the cam. Well, we were opening up mags here that had 1,000, 1,200, 1,300 hours on them, and the cam still looked like brand new. Well, going back to this timing drift issue, obviously the Champion slick design is a balanced wear design. You must have normal wear on the cam to offset the erosion of the point spring. A slick magneto fires 8 million times at 2,700 RPM in an aircraft engine. Every single time that magneto fires, it erodes a little bit of that surface material off the point face. So your point faces become thinner and thinner and thinner as the magneto ages. Well, that thinning of the point face causes timing to advance. So if you install a set of magnetos at 25 degrees and you got there 50 hours later, and goodness gracious, they're at 27 degrees or 28 degrees, obviously you can still just loosen up the mag nuts, pray to the gasket god that they're not going to tear, and tweak it back to 25 degrees. But that is point face erosion. If the cam were to wear excessively, you would get retarded timing. So instead of 25, let's just say the point face didn't erode or eroded less than the cam eroded. Some of you may remember Service Bulletin 2-08 Alpha, where we put a little bit of talc powder into our cams to make them erode away in 2 or 3 hours. If the cam erodes too rapidly, you can have timing retarded. So if you put it at 25 and you go back out there 50 or 100 hours later for an oil change or clean and rotating spark plugs, and you see 22 or 23 degrees, now it's the cam that's wearing excessively. Remember, with a balanced wear design, the wear on the cam offsets the wear on the point spring. So Champion Slick defined excessive timing drift as anything more than 4 degrees in 100 hours or less. If you look at a magneto and it's 100 hours or less, and it has 4 or more degrees of timing drift, that magneto should be removed from service and troubleshooting done to find out why the wear is happening and have it corrected. Now, it's very normal to get wear on slick cams and slick point faces. It has to happen for the magneto to work correctly, but it has to be a balanced wear design. Whenever you have more than 5 degrees timing drift, it's time to go into the magneto and at a minimum reset E-gap. Once you go more than 5 degrees, either advanced or retarded on a slick magneto internally, the magneto is making only about half the spark energy that it's required to make. So it's a big deal. When you start doing this, what you notice on the aircraft is that it gets to be hard starting and it gets to be larger and larger mag drops. So you can either track it during your oil changes and spark plug rotations by checking the timing and documenting advanced or retarded drift, or you can wait till you get a no-start engine and pull it apart to see what you've got to do to get it back into control. SB, SL 74-20-001, timing drift. Just for the people who wonder, what the heck is this numbered like that for? It's because Jeff Litton, the tech writer at Champion, is way smarter than me. This was supposed to be service letter 1-15, but he didn't like that number. All right. We're still having some issues here with rebuilt versus overhauled. Our competitor, Kelly Aerospace, is still overhauling magnetos today. And I would caution you, be very, very careful what you get from them because they use a mix of used parts in their magnetos. You can have 20-year-old coils, 20-year-old condensers put in a overhaul that was done last week at Kelly Aerospace. I would caution you that I actually have got back two 4271 magnetos that were actually labeled as overhauled by Kelly Aerospace, and they were labeled as 4371s. So as an AMPIA, you need to know what a part looks like and what the difference is from parts that have been superseded. The 4300 series uses a spacer in the frame and housing of the magneto to mount the distributor block. The little pointed ridge where the two join together, where the screw goes between the housing and the frame, is much, much shorter and more pointed on the 4300-6300 series magneto than on the 4200-6200 series. That's how my customer noticed that this was not a proper labeled magneto. Now, why is that important? Well, let's see. I just told you there were no ADs on a 4371 impulse coupling, and there are no ADs on a 4371 coil. However, there are ADs on 4271 impulse coupling rivets and 4271 coils. And might I remind you, Kelly, per their FAA DER maintenance manual, is allowed to reuse parts. Not sure exactly how you overhaul a coil while you're wiping the dust off it and putting it back in, checking the resistance, but they're allowed to do that. So you could get a mag that has ADs against it that's improperly marked. Just, you get what you pay for. Be very careful where you go. I would point out that QAA, who is now doing all the warranty processing and customer service for magnetos, is also still rebuilding magnetos. So you can get your magnetos rebuilt there, several $100s per mag, cheaper than OE new slick mags. All right, and here's a perfect example of the picture I was showing. You can see the one on the left, these are both labeled 4371. If you have good eyes, you can see that. The one on the left is the 4271. The one on the right is the 4371. Show you the way my brain works. I gave the young man who owned that Kelly Aerospace overhaul a brand new 4371, freshly made off the line at the factory, and he traded me straight up for this Kelly. So that's the way my brain works. I don't like to see something that could potentially have a catastrophic failure remain in service, even if it's not my issue. All right, price kits. The maintenance kits haven't changed. I would point out to you that don't work in magnetos all the time that the 500-hour inspection kits are not a great value. You can talk to people like Nick up at U&D, and he'll tell you how seldom a condenser for a slick mag fails. So having to fork out an extra $100, $120 for a condenser to get your 500-hour kit is not a good deal. Champion has started selling individually components again. I would point out to you that do a lot of slick magneto maintenance that the maintenance kits are a screaming good deal. The parts in that kit probably sells for about $800 retail, where a new slick magneto can be as high as $1,300, $1,400 today. That kit has everything needed to overhaul a slick magneto minus the impulse coupling. That's why it's called a maintenance kit and is not called an overhaul kit. You still cannot overhaul a slick magneto cheaper than buying an OE new slick magneto. The impulse couplings are priced at about $600 retail. And if you add that to the $800, $850 for this kit, you're up above the price of an OE new slick mag. So if you're buying an overhauled slick magneto from anybody in the field, you know immediately that it's not done to the slick maintenance manual. Nobody in the field is going to overhaul a slick magneto and then sell it to you cheaper than an OE new slick magneto using our maintenance manual, because the parts alone with no labor cost more than an OE new Champion slick magneto. All right, where am I at? 2010. The core policy. Again, this is the last one I wrote. I believe this was dated in 2017. Yep, December of 2017. So as of today, these are still acceptable cores. Again, you will not get a core charge when you buy the OE new Slick Mag today. But if your cores are not returned within the allowed time, I apologize, 90 days or 6 months, you will be charged a $500 per mag core charge. Don't know exactly how they're going to execute that. But cores will now also be going back to Quality Aircraft Accessory. So hopefully I can get a little more insight into what they're doing and what they're accepting the week after this, when I'm out there at Qatar. Again, I want to remind everyone that the 4,000, 4,100 throwaway slicks, I can't believe I'm still getting calls on these. 50 years down the road, I'm still getting calls on it. I got a 4101 last week. The guy wanted core credit for his 4101 if he upgraded to the 4301s. The answer is no. Core credit's not been allowed in more than 40 years. This man was still flying a magneto that was designed to go 800 hours or 12 years, and it was made 50 years ago. And just if you need a bit of a chuckle, that magneto, when it was new, sold for $38. The last of the 4100 series that they sold for $62 for the entire magneto. So they are not allowed for core credit. The Iceman and Case have now rejected for core credit. But interesting, I convinced them to add in, because of the problem with parts on the D2000, D3000s, because of the orphanage that Continental Motors did to the dual mags, I convinced them to allow the $500 core credit. I would assume today that would be up to $1,000 core credit if they bought a new kit. Many people are converting their engines from a dual mag to 2 single mags. To do that requires a change of the crank and the accessory case. So it's a big deal, but at least this helps you recover some of your cost of doing that. All right, and my time is getting down to 2012. The toolkit hasn't changed. I'll skip past that. Here's a Okay, is that you, Patty? I just got a big double ding in. No? Okay, I'll keep going. So I've got EGAP demonstrated here. I would point out something that seems to be rearing its head again this month. It's amazing how things go around and come around. You can see the cam slot up there by the point in the rotor shaft where the M1811 cam rides in that cam slot. In that, I have started getting a few calls on magnetos that have failed at the cam slot. This has always been a little bit of a problem child. And before 2005, we used to get 80 to 100 of these a year that had very few hours on them that failed there at the cam slot. It used to be a raw 90-degree cut. Between 2004 and 2005, we ended up changing that to a full radius cut, and we went to an improved steel in a few of the part numbers. After 2005 to 2011, we were getting about 3 magnetos a year, all 4370s, that were still suffering cracks at the cam slot and they were much higher hour magnetos now that were failing with the improved steel in them. Josh Christopher in 2011 changed the penetration depth of the radius for that cam slot a few thou. He said that my good friend Dale Kelly at Unison had missed the sweet spot for that. And between 2011 and 2021, well, let's go to 2020. I had 4 reports of broken rotors at the cam slot. Every one of them was a 4370. In the last 3 weeks, I've had 5 reports. One customer has had 3 4345 retard breaker magnetos that have broke at the cam slot. So No clue, no idea, but this could be another service bulletin coming. I would point out that this is called for during inspection at the 500-hour IRAN. It's a lighted visual or dye penetrant inspection. I'm not asking you to pull the rotors out and magnaflux them. If you see any type of crack propagating from that rotor shaft, that rotor should not be returned to service. And based on ballpark $600 rotor cost, I would suggest that that's a great core at that point. I also want to point out to y'all that there are some things you need to think about if you're considering using the rebuilt process. Remember, they're going to rebuild your magneto. I don't think it's very bright to take a magneto that falls under Service Bulletin 1-19 for stop pin movement and have that magneto rebuilt. It's always a potential catastrophic engine failure if the stop pin comes out. Oh, and I didn't mention this. I'd like to mention this. The week after I released SB 1-19, I got a call from South Florida, and it was actually Wyatt Lowe calling me. One of his customers had just landed for fuel and had a stop pin that worked its way completely out and actually, luckily, punched a hole in the adapter. There was a hole about a half an inch wide and an inch long where the stop pin punched through the adapter, and the stop pin and the piece were laying in the bottom of the cowling when he shut the engine down and got it drugged back in. Obviously, we both know that's the best thing that could have happened, the easiest fix that could have happened. You've just got to replace the adapter, the gasket, and the magneto. If that had gone into the engine, into the gear train, it would have been much different. Again, I just can't in my mind fathom why anybody would want to have one of the magnetos rebuilt that could potentially suffer this failure. Anything else at EGAP? I would only point out bullet number 3, the maintenance manual allows 8 to 10 thou. I will tell you that historically it's always been 8 to 12 thou. I personally, when I'm working on my own magnetos, use 8 to 12 thou. This is holding it to 10 thou is supposed to reduce point bounce. I've never seen 11 thou or 12 thou point gap that caused failure of the point spring. So my own personal use when I'm doing my own magnetos are 8 thou to 12 thou. The distributor block assembly, our good friend. I've had some interesting calls and comments on some distributor blocks. It hasn't changed. The distributor block obviously was redesigned in 2008 for SB3-08 Bravo for that carbon brush that you're seeing in the lower right picture. But I would point out that Olight bushing in the center of the cap needs oiled. The R5008 is a Exxon Thoracic 100 oil, but you can buy it under that part number from Slick, from a Slick distributor. And I would guess, I'd love to pick Nick's brain on this one, but I guess one quart could do about 50 to 100 magnetos. So the way you can get it from Exxon is a 5-gallon or 55-gallon drum. Can't imagine the number of magnetos you'd have to turn to get that. I would point out the carbon brush is a normal wear item. When you take this magneto apart at 500 hours, you should expect to see black dust throughout the magneto. It's the wear of the carbon brush. And I want to slip back a slide just to point out the coil tab. The coil tab, the maintenance manual calls for that to be flush and perpendicular to 1/8 of an inch down from the mating half of the magneto. If that coil tab is either cocked up or cocked down, even if it's below the mating half of the magneto, it will cause the carbon brush to kind of ride in a circle on that Olight bushing. That'll do two things. It'll eat your carbon brush up on the edges, and it will also eat that Olight bushing up and cause you to have to replace that very expensive distributor block cap. So make sure you get that coil tab flush. And just a quick reminder, you have to measure the wear. You're allowed 1 thou wear per 100 hours time in service, down to 8 thou still remaining to get another 500-hour run out of that coil. The coil tab is nominal 18 thou plus or minus a half thou. So you measure a non-worn part of the coil tab to get your baseline. Then you use a pin micrometer. You measure in the dimple or the wear hole, and you measure how many thou is eroded away. You find out how many hours on the mag. If you had a 100-hour mag and it had eroded away 3 or 4 thou of coil tab wear, even though there's still 15 thou remaining, that coil would be rejectable because it will not go another 500 hours, and that coil tab will drill through the coil tab. It's never pretty when that happens. I just got another double ping. I don't know what they're trying to tell me with that, but that's okay. 10 minutes left.
It's not me.
All right, Patty, thanks. That's okay. I think maybe people are trying to join us, what it is. I don't know if you can control that from that end, but I see some people in the waiting room. All right, let's talk a little bit about my condenser. All right, you guys have heard me say this many times. The condenser is failed if your points are burnt. Yes, we've got a measurement in there for microfarads. Yes, we have a minimum, a 10 megohm insulation resistance between the conductor, the center conductor, and the can of the condenser. But if the points aren't burnt, the condenser's doing its job. If the points are burnt, the condenser and the points both need to be replaced. All right, we talked a little bit about the coil. I'd point out here that coils never heal themselves. If I'm doing a 500-hour, I don't care if it's the first one or the third one, and I get in there and I got 18.5, 19 thou ohms on the secondary, I'm rejecting that coil, even though it's still within limit. Why am I doing that? The coil never heals itself. The voltage leaving the factory, the resistance, of the secondary, is going to be right at 15,000 to 16,000. If you're looking at 18.5 or 19, that means the secondary started to fail. The secondary has 44 gauge wire in it. That 44 gauge wire, if you still have hair on your head, it's as fine as the hair on your head. When those start breaking down, they make an air gap in the secondary. An air gap causes electrical erosion. Electrical erosion causes a bigger air gap. The magnetos are headed to death. So look at your coil, measure the primary, measure the secondary. If it's on the high side, seriously consider sticking another coil in. Again, no need to remove the coil unless it fails any of the resistance or visual inspections, including checking the coil tab. I'm almost out of time. Talk about my double sealed bearings. This is what I'm talking about when I was talking about that 12 calendar year. There is no way that this bearing can be repacked. So the bearing has to be replaced. Think about this. These bearings have been in production since 1990. You can have a 31-year-old mag. Do you really want to be signing off an annual with 31-year-old bearing grease in there? I'm not trying to frighten you, and I hate the whole CYA attitude, but I guarantee you a good lawyer's going to take away your future if you trying to convince 12 good men and women that you know how good 30-year-old bearing grease is inside them bearings. If the bearings are more than 12 years old and there's no documentation showing they've been replaced, they must be replaced. This is the lower bearing, the M3006. The same bearing goes in the bearing cap. However, Champion does not allow you to build the bearing cap assembly. You must order and buy the bearing cap assembly. These do come in the maintenance kits. The M601 would be the 6310 magneto maintenance kit, has bearings and an oil seal in it. So go ahead and if you got to do bearings anyway, the maintenance kit is a screaming good value. Even if you don't need the coil, even if you don't need the distributor block, the coil is used in every slick mag made. You'll have another mag you can stick it in. The distributor block will go in every 6-cylinder slick mag, Lycoming or Continental made. You'll have a chance to use that. Buy those maintenance kits, make a little extra labor money for yourself, and save a little money for your customers. I've got about 6 more minutes. Talk about the impulse coupling rivets. This hasn't changed. I'm never going to quit beating this drum. Well, I probably will quit beating this drum about April 2nd, unless the world changes between now and April 2nd. Guys, gals, never take an impulse coupled mag off without doing this inspection. Never take an impulse coupled mag off without checking these rivets and pawls for wear. This is extremely critical on the IO, OIO, and TIO 540 Lycoming engines. This TIO group of engines, shame on me, I missed in original service bulletin SB2-19. So please go back into them and look at those very carefully. There's a very tight restriction on the fifth order counterweight engines, OIO and TIO engines. You're going to have to inspect these rivets every 100 hours on that application. The reason for that is AD 990404. Now that doesn't cover, that AD does not cover every fifth order counterweight. It should. I've argued with that Lycoming. I've argued that with Unison. I've argued that with Champion. I've argued that with a million different people, and I've never won that battle. But the fifth order counterweight engines has a vibratory harmonic that just beats the crap out of these rivets. It necks down the rivets. It elongates the pawl hole, and it causes the impulse coupling to be able to engage at high speed. The impulse coupling must engage between 0 and 150 RPM. It can engage between 150 and 475. We don't care if it does or doesn't. North of 475, it can never engage. If it engages at high speed, it'll only happen once. It will rip the pawl off. It will go through the gear train. It will destroy the engine. You guys have heard me say this many times. If you're having a good day, you have a $10,000 to $30,000 engine repair. If you're having a bad day, you're going to have a funeral. Somebody else gets to rebuild the engine if the airplane's still rebuildable. Well, I got just a couple minutes left here, so I want to take just a minute to say what an honor it's been to work with you all through the years. I appreciate your trust in me. I appreciate you letting me solve problems for you. It's been a great life. I've got a future left ahead of me. I truly worry about the product line. I hope I'll be able to let go of that one day, but Champion has other thoughts, and that's all good. There's a lot of people smarter than me running that company, and I do understand that I'm an expensive old man, but I just really wanted to emphasize to y'all that this has been a real blessing in my life, having this job and getting to work with people like you. To have a team like UND who's been helping me do my job better, helping Unison, helping Champion make better magnetos. It's really great to get to know people like that. Again, I'll be gone very, very soon. If you all need help after that, I'm hoping that Wyatt, I'm hoping I can do a Vulcan mind melt with Wyatt next week, and he can absorb a little bit of what I've got over the years. I've said many times, I don't know anything about anything except aircraft ignition. If you've got a question about ignition, aircraft ignition, I know the answer or I know where to find it. It's nice having a very small product line and not having to do what you all do. You have to know everything about everything. So again, you all have been great in my life. I'm going to sign off here and tell you all to have a wonderful winter. You can appreciate that warm spell you're going through right now. I sent that up from the south here. We were already suffering through some 75-degree days. And yes, I do have tomato plants in my garden. All right, guys, it's back to you, Patty, and onward and upward for the team.